So he already had divorce paper before she even defended herself. So was this about the baby anymore?
Open the door, Ethan, please! I slammed both fists against the front door while rain soaked through my sweater and down my swollen stomach. Inside, my husband just stood there behind the glass, staring at me like I was a stranger. I was 8 months pregnant, barefoot on our porch at midnight, while our neighbors watched through their windows. My suitcase was already sitting beside the trash cans. Then Ethan unlocked the door for half a second, just long enough to throw a folder at my feet. "A DNA test appointment," he said coldly, "since you're so determined to lie." I froze when I saw my own prenatal paperwork clipped inside it. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "That baby isn't mine." I couldn't even breathe. And before I could even respond, headlights suddenly pulled into the driveway behind me. The headlights washed across the rain-covered street, and for one horrible second, I thought Ethan had called the police on me. Instead, my older sister Nina jumped out of her car in pajama pants and a hoodie, her face tightening the moment she saw me standing there with my suitcase. "What the hell is going on?" she shouted over the rain. Before I could answer, Ethan opened the front door just enough to speak through the gap. "She cheated," he said flatly, "and she's not staying here anymore." My stomach dropped. Nina looked between us like she was waiting for Ethan to laugh and admit this was some disgusting joke, but he didn't. He just stood there with one hand gripping the doorframe, completely calm while I stood outside carrying his child. "Ethan," my voice cracked, "you cannot seriously believe that." "I know dates, Maya," he snapped. "I know exactly when this happened." "That doesn't even make sense." He ignored me and looked directly at Nina instead. "Take her somewhere else." Then he shut the door again, just like that. The porch light clicked off a second later. I remember standing there in the dark, shaking so hard my teeth hurt, while rainwater dripped from my hair down onto the folder at my feet. Across the street, curtains moved. People were watching. Nina grabbed my arm. "Get in the car." The second I sat down in the passenger seat, I broke. Not graceful crying, not movie crying. I folded forward so hard I could barely breathe. "I didn't do anything," I kept repeating. "I didn't do anything." Nina drove without speaking for almost 5 minutes before finally asking, "Did he say where this is even coming from?" I wiped my face with both hands. "He thinks the baby isn't his." "No, I got that part. Why?" I stared out the rain-streaked window, trying to understand it myself. 3 months earlier, Ethan had painted the nursery himself. He used to talk to my stomach every night. He cried when we heard the heartbeat for the first time. And then something changed. At first, it was subtle. He stopped touching me, started working later, started asking strange questions out of nowhere. "What exactly happened at your appointment Tuesday? Why did Daniel drive you home? Why were you texting so much at night?" Daniel was my project manager. He drove me home once because I nearly fainted leaving the clinic, but after that, Ethan became obsessed with tiny details that never mattered before. The timing of the pregnancy, the due date, who I talked to, who liked my photos online. I thought it was stress, anxiety, maybe fear about becoming a father. I never imagined he was building a case against me in his head. When we finally reached Nina's apartment, I looked down at the folder Ethan had thrown at me. The DNA appointment was already scheduled for Friday morning. My hands started shaking again when I realized something. He hadn't made this appointment tonight. He'd planned this before he ever locked me out.
So he already scheduled the divorce before confronting her. So why was he pretending everything between them was normal?
And at the very bottom of the paperwork, clipped behind the appointment confirmation, was something else. A printed draft of divorce papers with my name already filled in. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan standing behind the glass door, looking at me like I disgusted him. By morning, my entire body ached. My back hurt, my feet were swollen, and my phone wouldn't stop vibrating on Nina's kitchen table. Messages, calls, notifications. Not from Ethan, from his family. His mother sent a single text. "You should have told the truth before trapping my son." I stared at it so long, the screen dimmed. Nina snatched the phone off the table. "Don't answer any of them." But it was already spreading. By noon, Ethan's cousin had unfollowed me everywhere. His aunt posted some vague quote online about loyalty eventually being exposed. Even people who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly viewed my stories without saying a word. He'd told them, before the test, before any proof, like he'd already convicted me. I sat on Nina's couch holding my stomach while my baby kicked hard enough to shift beneath my ribs. And all I could think was, how did we get here this fast? 5 years of marriage, 3 years trying for a baby, and now I was apparently some woman he believed capable of destroying his life? That afternoon, Ethan finally called. I almost didn't answer. "What?" I said the second I picked up. His voice was cold, controlled. "Be at the clinic Friday at 9. That's all you have to say to me? You know what you did." "I didn't do anything!" There was silence for a second, then he exhaled sharply. "Maya, stop pretending I'm stupid. Then explain it to me. Explain why you suddenly think your child isn't yours." Another pause. Too long. Then he said quietly, "Because the timeline doesn't work." My grip tightened around the phone. What timeline? But before he answered, I heard another voice faintly in the background. A woman's voice. Soft, close to him. And the second I said, "Who's there with you?" the call disconnected. I called Ethan back immediately, straight to voicemail. Again, voicemail. By the 4th try, my chest was so tight I could barely breathe. Nina took the phone from my hand before I could throw it across the room. "You heard a woman," she said carefully. "I know what I heard." But somehow that hurt less than what came after. Friday morning, we walked into the clinic waiting room and every muscle in my body locked up. Ethan wasn't alone. His mother sat beside him with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. His cousin Rachel was there too, whispering something the second I walked in. All 3 of them looked at me like I was already guilty. The testing room suddenly felt too small for air. The nurse explained the procedure, but I barely heard her over the pounding in my chest. Ethan sat across from me with his arms folded, avoiding my eyes now for the first time since this nightmare started. That scared me more than his anger, because up until this moment, he'd been completely certain. The technician collected my sample first, then Ethan's. The entire time, his mother sat near the door watching me with visible disgust, like she couldn't wait for the results to expose me. When the nurse stepped out with the samples, silence swallowed the room. Then the doctor walked in. Older man, calm voice, reading glasses low on his nose. He introduced himself, opened a file, and immediately frowned. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. Ethan noticed too. "What?" he asked sharply. The doctor looked up. "Mr. Carter, before we continue, I need to ask whether you've ever undergone any major medical procedures involving donor cells, tissue, or transplant treatment." Ethan's expression changed instantly. It wasn't confusion, it was panic. Nobody moved. His mother spoke before he could. "Why does that matter?" The doctor stayed focused on Ethan. "Because your preliminary markers show an inconsistency we occasionally see in transplant patients." My brain struggled to catch up. "Inconsistency?" I repeated. Ethan stood up too quickly. "This test is wrong." The doctor remained calm. "I didn't say that." "Yes, you did." "No," the doctor said carefully. "I said your sample produced unusual genetic indicators." For the first time since this started, Ethan looked genuinely shaken. I stared at him. What is he talking about? Ethan dragged a hand over his face but said nothing. Then the doctor asked one final question. "Mr. Carter, have you ever received a bone marrow transplant?" And judging by the color draining from Ethan's face, the doctor already knew the answer. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Ethan just stood there beside the chair, frozen, one hand gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Finally, his mother looked between us. Ethan? He swallowed hard. When I was 19, I had leukemia, he said quietly. I blinked at him. In 5 years of marriage, I knew he'd been seriously sick when he was younger. I knew there had been hospitalizations, scars, recovery, but leukemia? A bone marrow transplant? He never told me that. I just stared at him. The doctor nodded slowly. That explains the conflicting results. Ethan looked sick now. Not angry, not cold, just terrified. The doctor opened the file fully and spoke carefully, like he'd had versions of this conversation before. A bone marrow transplant can permanently alter the DNA profile found in blood, he explained. If donor marrow replaces a patient's original marrow, blood-based DNA tests may reflect the donor's genetic markers instead. I stared at him, trying to process the words. Then it hit me all at once. The secret test, his certainty, the accusations. Oh my God, I whispered. The doctor continued. Your husband's preliminary blood sample produced markers inconsistent with standard paternity expectations because the donor DNA interfered with the analysis. Ethan slowly sank back into his chair. But the confirmatory testing, the doctor said, sliding the final report across the table, used alternate tissue samples. Ethan picked up the paper with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the page once, then again. The color drained completely from his face, and the paper slipped from his fingers onto the floor. I didn't even need to read it. I already knew. The baby was his. Everything changed. Every accusation, every cruel word, every second I spent humiliated and abandoned, all of it was because he believed a private test more than he believed me. His mother grabbed the report first. Her eyes widened. Oh, that was it. No apology, no defense, just oh. I looked at Ethan, waiting for something, anything that could explain how the man who once cried hearing our baby's heartbeat became someone capable of locking his pregnant wife outside in the rain. Instead, he whispered, I thought you lied to me. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe that was his explanation. You threw me out, I said, my voice shaking. You told everyone I cheated. You let your family destroy me before you even had real answers. I panicked. No, I cut in sharply. You decided I was guilty. The room went silent. Even his mother looked down. And suddenly I understood something that hurt worse than the accusations themselves. This was never really about the test. The test just revealed who Ethan became the second he was afraid. Over the next few days, the truth spread almost as fast as the rumors had. Relatives who ignored my calls suddenly wanted to apologize. Ethan's cousin sent a long message claiming she didn't know the full story. His mother deleted every post she made about me without ever directly admitting what she'd done. But the damage stayed. Some people looked embarrassed around me afterward. Others looked at Ethan differently, especially after Nina told everyone he'd secretly tested the baby weeks earlier while pretending our marriage was fine. That part shocked people the most. Not the medical mistake, the betrayal. Ethan tried constantly after that. Calls, flowers, long texts at 2 a.m. He said fear made him irrational, said seeing the false result triggered something in him he couldn't control, said he hated himself for what he'd done. Maybe he meant it, but none of that changed the memory of standing outside our locked house while carrying his child. 2 months after our son was born, I moved into my own apartment. Small place, quiet neighborhood, new locks. Ethan came by one evening to drop off diapers and see the baby. He stood in the doorway, staring down at our son sleeping against my chest, his expression full of regret so deep it almost looked physical. Then his eyes drifted to the new lock installed on the door. I noticed him looking, and calmly, without anger, I said, "A DNA test proved you were the father, but your choices proved I couldn't trust you as a husband." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but this time, he had nothing to say.
Sometimes people don't need real proof to destroy someone's life. They just need an explanation that seems believable enough. How many relationships do you think break quietly that same way every year?